So this is my latest project. It's number 4 in a series I'm doing to kind of showcase some vintage pieces of jewelry that I have. So there's still lots more to do on this, namely quilting, maybe some embroidery. But what I wanted to show you all today is a border treatment that I just think is wonderful. You see how the butterflies are overlapping onto the border? So lots of times we have these gorgeous fabrics. We want to use them in a border, but you know, the images are so nice, we sort of hate to cut them off. You know, Dawn has put out some wonderful fabrics behind me that you can see as we work, and you'd hate to cut the heads off the caps or whatever just because we want to put a nice straight border on. So I came up with this. I didn't read it somewhere, but I'm sure somebody else has invented it before me. And it's not all that difficult. So that's what we're going to be working on today. I'm going to fold this. Oh, I did also learn something. When you're stitching around these, you need some stabilizing. No problem. However, it does pay to have a nice, clean work surface sewing table, because my first task on the weekend was to stitch down this last doily, and it stitched really well, just around the edge to hold it down. But then when I went to clean the stabilizer off the border, I discovered I'd thrown over a piece of Kleenex. Kleenex does not make good stabilizer, but it also came off quite easily. Okay, focus, borders. So what we're going to start with, we're going to pretend that the green is either our quilt top, our quilt center, or an inner border. And this is going to be our outer border. And we want some of these flowers to kind of blend over onto the green. So I've cut a piece of fabric that's extra wide. It's wider than what my border is going to be, to give me room to focus on the flowers. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm just going to have a look and say, I like that line. That's kind of a fair bit of cutting, but that's all right. So when you discover the line, this would be where you would ordinarily sew your border on. This is the outer edge, and some of these flowers are going to be the ones that fold over onto the green inner border. So I've got my ruler down, and I'm not going to cut. I'm just going to mark. I'm going to take a marking pencil, and I am going to mark where I'm going to cut straight across. Here. There. That looks pretty good. There we go. Oh, there's my line. There's a good spot. There's a good spot. All the way along, as wide as your border is going to be on it. Now, I have made an executive decision. This flower I want to overlap. So I'm going to actually draw as a reminder a line, and I'm using probably 3/8 of an inch, but you can go a little narrower. You could go out to 1/4 of an inch around there, and I'm just going to decide what parts I want to overlap and what parts I don't. So I think this leaf, I think I'm just going to trim that off. You don't want to overdo it. I really liked the way the straight line of the border and the curved lines of the butterfly wings played off against each other. So I would mark all the way around, making the decision of what I wanted to cut off and what I wanted to keep. So we'll go about that far. Then, no rotary cutters, good old scissors. And I didn't want to open these up, but what I used at home, you've heard us talk about them before, are the Karen K. Buckley micro serrated scissors. Awesome for this sort of work. But we'll make do with the old ones. Okay, so we're going to cut on our marked line. Now, I'm not being really particular about all of these fine points on the flowers because this is a wonderful technique to play with some of the decorative stitches on your machine. And even the basic machines nowadays have some really, really nice decorative stitches. So you could do a satin stitch, if that's the look you like. You could do a basic blanket stitch. You could hand stitch around these if you needed something quiet and relaxing to do in an evening. But this is wonderful for those, well, that's close enough kind of moments. Okay, I think that's a big enough border. I'm just, let's go right to, that's plenty. So, I'm just going to cut the rest of this off. And I always would make it larger than what I need because I can always trim the excess off. So, that's kind of what it's going to look like when it's done, but that's not how we're going to sew it on. I'm going to take these straight lines. I'm going to use, I think, that edge. And I am going to line the straight lines up with the straight edge of that border. There we are, just like that. Good. And I'm just going to use my standard 1/4 of an inch seam. Remember which machine I'm on? Where am I? There we go. Now, the trick with this one is you're going to sew until you're about 1/4 of an inch away from where that flower starts. And I like to back tack about 3 stitches on forward. Stop. Lift that presser foot. Now you can cut your threads now or you can cut them afterwards. I think I'm just going to jump across, pull that thread through, start about 1/4 of an inch away from the flower. Stitch 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, forward a bit more, back a bit more, lift, and slide all the way along to the next straight part, right there. So now we've got the 2 pieces attached, and I'm going to go along and I'm going to trim off all of those jump stitches. There, remember there's 2 sides to it. Lovely green. I raided Dawn's stash of fabric. If anybody out there likes to use odds and ends and bits and pieces of fabric, if you do applique, Dawn very often makes up scrap bundles that are a really good deal. So now you can see we've got it attached, but our roses or flowers are on the wrong side. So we're just going to tuck those through to the front side. There we go. Give that a little shake. Now I would ordinarily at this point give it a bit of a press. So this one, there we are. So now you can see how some of them are pulling here, and that's because we're stitched just a bit close. So this is where you can either snip your stitches, or what I like to do is give the in just like that. There we are, there's that piece. And again, a good iron, press it well, and press your seam towards the floral side. There we go. Like this. So that one is starting to lay down nicely. This little guy, this is just like snipping the curves if you're sewing around a curved area. This guy's out of the way on the other. Let's get that over there. When you stop and think about it, it's really quite straightforward what you're doing. And you could certainly, I mean, overlap a printed piece of fabric on a solid piece of fabric that you have cut all the way along and just, in a sense, applique it down. But I really liked how the straight lines just kind of gave the effect of the images spilling over a wall or something. There we go. So if we pretend that was better pressed, there we go, like that. That doesn't look too bad. Then the next step, because these things are loose and flopping around, what I want to do is just baste them down so that they hold still. Now we could certainly use a bit of spray. Lots of ways of basting that down. But what I did with the original was I just used a straight stitch on my machine, and I stayed pretty close to the edge. This is that slow sewing stuff again. Default to needle down. And when you come to a curve, you lift that presser foot. There we go. I'm using white thread so you can kind of see a little better what I'm doing. But I think if I was, when I did the original, of course, you're going to use thread that's going to disappear. So, and I've got a fairly long stitch length, about a 3 millimeter on this one. There we go. There's that. So there's the first one done. Let's do one more. So there's a couple stitched down. And I would just work my way all the way along. So just lightly stitch down just to hold them in place. Again, I could have used a basting spray, maybe pins, but it depends on how big a border you're working on. If you're doing this technique along a whole border on a larger quilt, you're going to want to stitch them down. So then this is where you get to play with the decorative stitches on your own machine. And you can see, I'll pull this guy over here. What I used was a stitch that I have on my machine at home. It's like little overlapping arrowheads. And it gives almost an embroidered effect to it. And so I just started and I sewed around one butterfly and I went, should I carry on across there? I haven't done so. I just did the butterflies because I can always go back and add that on there. So you don't have to have fancy stitches. Why don't I just do a basic satin stitch? So that's really just a zigzag. I'm sitting at 3. I'm going to narrow it down just a bit. And I'm going to really shorten my stitch length. There we go. So this is white, I know. I probably should have had pink or maybe even green would be nice. But this is going to show really well. So now that's a really widely spaced zigzag. And I think that's not really pretty. So, but that's okay because I can stitch over that with a different color thread and make an even stronger edging on it. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to do one and see if I like it. Sometimes it's all about trying. All right. Yeah, I'm not so keen on that zigzag stitch, folks. That's not great. So I would go over that, probably with a green thread, and maybe do a really nice satin stitch because the red is quite strong against that green. So that when you're finished, it would show if I held that up like that. This is kind of the effect you're going to get once everything is stitched down. And there we are. I think that can be quite effective. I might be inclined to trim a little closer here, just from a color standpoint. So once you have your strip cut out like this, before you fasten it to your green border, I'm going to say green, but your inner border, if you took fusible interfacing and put it fused side out, right side in, on the right side of your fabric, stitched around here, you'd have to snip those curves, and then turned it, am I got that right? Yes. Turned it back inside, and then fused it. So now your interfacing is fused to the wrong side of this, but what you have is a clean edge here. Just that much. Then when you laid that down, you would have a clean edge here that you could easily, I'd be inclined to do a hand blanket stitch on it, or an applique stitch. So you have your piece of fabric that you wish to have you want to applique that down, but you want a neat edge. So you put your fusible interfacing on that side with the sticky side out, stitch around here, turn it, and fuse it. So now you have a piece that has a nice, clean, finished, turned-in edge, and the interfacing is fused underneath so it's nice and stable. That's loose, and then you would set that down and you could stitch around that any way that you wish. I was looking at this guy. Wouldn't that be fun if you took this as the inner part of your border, so your straight line comes along here, so your cat heads are what you would be cutting around, straight across and around there. So the heads are all sticking out into the inner border or the quilt top. That would just be so much fun. Dawn's great at choosing fabrics like that. This is another wonderful one here that I think could make. We've got parrots here, butterflies. When you start dissecting the images on fabric, it really opens up some of the creative things that you can do with it. What else we got? Oh, well, we can't forget this one. But if you can see, what will happen if that was right there, and we just had the pink overlapping onto the border. Sometimes it pays to take the time to play, to experiment, to see what comes out. Okay.
Those sunglasses are fun.
I know. How would we deal with the sunglasses? This is great fabric because of the strong diagonals on it. So I don't know how easy it would be to see the ruler. But if I set that ruler across there, there's my line. So I would probably fussy cut that, there, straight there. I might go around those guys, depending on how wide an inner border I have. Around there, skip that, and then out that way. So you would have this angle and this angle to work with. I think that would be really, really cute. This is one I would probably do upside down. So think of that line. This is your border. This is your inner border. So it's the sails that are going to stick up into your inner border.
That's cool.
All the way around.
It would be like your horizon line.
Yeah.
You're looking out into the ocean.
Yeah. We're going to add some more to our butterfly panel here, which actually the best part of making quilts is finding a name for them. This quilt is called Le Papillon.
Oh, nice.
Simply because I don't even remember where I got the pin from, but she kind of reminds me of the days when women at maybe the French court they were like little butterflies. They were beautiful to look at. Unfortunately, sometimes they were kept under lock and key a bit too much. So our butterflies are escaping.
I'm in.
You're in. All right. So next week we're going to add something more to our butterfly panel, and then hopefully
Are you going to wear a matching mask again? Because I think that's brilliant planning for your video.
Yes, of course. Well, hey, I mean, we have scraps. What are we going to do with them? We are going to make masks.
I think that's appropriate.
So till then, that's it. That's all. Any questions, by all means, send us a quick email.
Yep. Then we should say be safe.
Be kind.
And be calm. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye.